In the Darkness I See, by Anon Y. Chapter 5. Pride. Part 2. One afternoon, while I sat alone studying, he knocked on my door. Still happy with his reignited hope, I let him in. He knew that there was no need to beg for a moment of my time. There was an immediate and confusing uneasiness between us as our greetings faded into reminiscence. After thinking for a moment, I realized that our combined discomfort was palpable only because neither of us wanted to admit the brilliance of the call he had made. Maintaining our blissful avoidance of the phone call, pretending it was a triviality, he began a new sequence of actions, dissimilar to his usual Pavlovian pattern. He began pacing back and forth through my office. His long limbs gracefully lingered with an almost frenetic consistency. My heart pounded from the power and swagger he exuded. It took him a while to settle. Again, Tommy's internal Mustang, running through the unfamiliar framing of his new corral, bounded through my heart and mind. I sat patiently while my overwhelming cognizance of his struggle saturated me. Unsteady and unsure of his place, Tommy had no more options. No excuse remained for the desertion of his potential. His urgency for abscondence cried out from his darting eyes, but he remained. I was the first to verbal communication, starting off our discourse in a rather pyrogenic manner. "Isn't it tough to deal with suicidality?" I retorted against his desire for silence as stillness, when you can no longer dilute yourself into believing that your will to power isn't being infringed upon by anyone other than yourself. The corresponding look on his face was intensely dynamic, shifting from aggravated to infuriated and then to frustrated admittance. I was interested and entertained by his caged mind. There was to be no more sad scarpering for the trapped Tommy. We stared seriously at one another for a quiet moment, and then started faintly laughing. I understood and appreciated the trouble that he had made for himself, and he acknowledged that I was fit to assimilate to the travesty of his adolescence. It was clear, mostly from my sternly unwavering refusal of his fallacious frenzies, that intense strife in early adulthood was a shared experience. There was little malice left between us. He and I both began to accept our new reality, uncomfortably easy as it was to be vulnerable. After the all but tranquil agreeance had passed and he slowly seated himself, just before he made his newest strange comment, there was the moment for which any who knows more than his breakfast, bath, and bed awaits in a relationship. With the gears tumultuously ticking within my timepiece, the condensation drearily dripping down my dewy drink, and as pleasantly and as beside me as ever, the bulb languidly lighting the lofty lampshade, a warm moment of shared shining acceptance met us as an angel upon mites. I am not yet sure if philosophical pragmatism is the most effective modality through which to live a life, said Tommy, breaking the quiet. It always seems to guide me to the most depraved parts of us. The most simplistic and animalistic logic dwelling in our brainstem consistently fabricates our decisions. I can no longer just accept this. After all, how can anything I theorize or believe, if derived from my own over-evolved primate brain, be veracious? It's just another Ouroboros. I'm tired of hating myself. Once again correcting his misguided self-loathing, I jumped in, saying, "When you abandon the metaphysical for a moment and think practically, only atomized assimilation exists through time. From this presumption, our desires are neither good nor bad. They are either malformed or socially aligned self-service. From the most sadistic murderer to the lovely lady he victimizes, they both act on behalf of themselves, modulating between their supposed goodness and evil. If you feel bad about what drives you, you must hate all others, for they are also inescapably influenced, and usually totally occupied by their self-service. They may not be interested in unwinding their reality, but they are undeniably driven by the same internal systems. Their diffidence or defiance, their temptation towards the negative symptomologies based on their past, their choices, These are the things that we must analyze. Intentions matter, but actions override thoughts. We are all lost, but must find a way through ourselves. Free yourself of this intense guilt. It is driven by your misapprehension and uneven administration of judgment. In my attempt to reconfigure Tommy's mind into an accepting of reality machine, another wave of liberating constriction tightened around his protective constitution. Resiliently, he rose and started again pacing. It was clearly too much of a change for his mind to be lovingly cleared of guilt. He had been so built up for so long, lost in his introspective anguish, that he couldn't find release. There was no counter-argument left, no distance from his beautifully wicked mind. With a small amount of guidance, he could have virtuously built such a palace of true pride, but instead a crushing boil had formed over him. The thought of it brought me half to tears. Tommy's lost greatness still eluded him. I wanted to help him more than ever. With my eyes growing red, I whispered to him, "You don't have to prove anything to me, my boy. You are wonderful, not perfect, but wonderful. You have the brightest light, filled with the grandest impetus to be better. This is all a man truly needs." It was like speaking to myself, needing assurance in my goodness after losing myself in my faults. It took time to settle Tommy down, to read through his problems as clearly as possible. I assured him that he was safe, reaching out and gesturing for him to calmly sit. It is too often that we find ourselves in a cycle of problematic revelations, I added. These paradigm shifts often turn inwardly and cause more harm than resolution. This reductive lens through which you have peered for some time now has left you with no one to blame but yourself. While this methodology allows for growth when used clearly and logically, it is too easily overdrawn. You have applied scrutiny to your soul instead of the cancerous and pervasive protective capabilities of your mind. Enraptured awe will follow those who love themselves enough to view themselves clearly. You have been too smart for too long, ferocious but misguided. He smiled and agreed with my summation. It was as though he could finally release some internal dialogue into the universe. His emancipation granted freedom to a smile, the physical representation of the untying of his thoughts from his identity. He finally found protection from his hindered heart. His eyes danced celebratorily. He sat once again and leaned back into the couch. Like a newborn being baptized, his writhing body was taken by the blessed sanctity of deliverance, easing him into muted steadiness. I smiled for him and said, "It is an honor to understand you." He smiled back at me and gleefully joked, "Give it a minute." We laughed together again and then returned to unvocalized peace. I had found my route forward with him. I had to justify his trust in me. I had to allow him to gently reveal his secrets only within the echoes of my chambers. He had not trusted anyone for a long while. That was abundantly clear. His faith had been taken. Perhaps it had never been formulated. It was going to take much more time and familiarity to lose the layers that remained between us. Cautious and careful, Tommy remained pensive. I meant no harm, and he was coming to terms with it. I only served to amend his oblique righteousness through opposition, stern but forthright. Suddenly, slicing through the calm, a thought of unimaginably inconsiderate chemistry dashed into my brain. I immediately mishandled my newly adorned trustworthiness by nodding at him. I wanted to see his capability to read social cues, testing his level of introverted temperament and possibly probing for autism. His unresponsive look concerned me. Unable to ruminate and react simultaneously, maybe, I wondered. He took a moment and responded, querying, "Why did you just nod at me?" Immediately regretting my indirect accusation, I said, "I wondered if you had ventured into another realm of thought. I am interested in the level of your thought's unidirectionality, especially when you are possessed by the focused achievement of freedom from yourself. Intensely apologetic as I remained, I inaudibly gulped, my mind too set on permuting the possible causes for my id's ineffable, intrigue-driven act out against his iconoclastic intellect to focus on trivial physical happenings. He stared at me almost vicariously. I had gotten too comfortable, leading myself to believe that I needed not to do my job, but rather explore the mental scape of a most absurd outlier. I had treated him as an interesting friend rather than a client. Taking my answers seriously, Tommy looked up while he thought. His eyes enlarged from the enormity of his excitement. He peered up into the intricacies of the gypsum above him. I viscerally felt his analysis of the contradiction between my inconsiderate action and my pithy explanation. While he perused the ceiling, I continued to think. My mind quite quickly shifted back from my selfishness. Before I could regret my actions fully, he responded to my claim. While usually my focus is infinitely intense, Tommy explained, and thus overwhelming, I see great value in it. I am seldom distracted from my focus. I think this is a reality for only a few people. He grinned an avaricious grin. In this I take great solace. Relieved by his incorrect analysis of my rude gesture and fraudulent rationalization, I smiled and agreed with the virtue he had discovered. While the guilt of my actions would ride over me for many ensuing days, I took comfort in the idea that Tommy could be so cognizant of his strengths, even with an accusation against his mind's positive more than normalcy lingering. Though his claim was seemingly prejudiced, it had clearly originated from an honest and almost modest place. I knew that to be true. I found myself proud of him once again. That prideful acknowledgment paired beautifully with my shame. After a great pause, we switched our focus from him and back to a broader topic. He incentivized the switch by filling the room with confused anger or passion, hesitating for a moment before announcing his grand idea. The good and the evil, the strong and the weak, he suddenly said. I was rather taken by the drastic shift, that obscure objection, and so I asked for a more definitive depiction of his meaning. With no secondary temporizing, Tommy added, "We are so focused on the impact of our biological systems that we forget to notice the truth of this world. I hold no ambivalence towards reality. The universe feels not for our quandaries nor passions. It is indifferent to our terrors and upheavals. The structure of good and evil is a modulating spectrum placed forth by a free society. More importantly, a society at peace. Mostly at peace, anyhow. This adaptive metric, though changing because of our sociological adaptation and evolution, is rather immobile. Along this moral landscape lies all men, from the sadistic psychopath to the innocent martyr. Each of these men are characterized by their action within this region of moral action as strong or weak. Thus, there are 4 maximal cases through which each man exerts his power. Oh, that consistent connection between us. The 4 extremes are as follows: strong and good men, weak but good men, strong but evil men, and lastly, weak and evil men. Like a simple graph with 2 axes, men find themselves always at some point within these 4 bounds. I felt an urgency within his announcement. For clarification, I asked, "Why is this idea so important to you, with all the sweated effort put in by you to depict it with such clear imagery?" He looked at me with pressurized gloominess, the pain unbearable. It was like he had been gifted an enormous but good rock that he was incapable of carrying. "I am attempting to rationalize the world," he explained. "Most of my perceptions, especially of one specifically inconceivable intake, have always been too much for me. I am most troubled as of late because of a documentary I watched on child pornography, and the rapid increase of its usage in recent years. Though I had thought I was equipped to encounter such darkness, my forthright rationality fell into peril at the mere sight of all these statistics and ideas and people, and my apathy quickly shriveled, taking the brunt of my frigid fright. The sensitive examination of the material was too much to remain unemotionally even-keeled. I have sat troubled for weeks now. I have tirelessly been trying to explain it all and rationalize the situation to perhaps outline a solution. As you would say, my lens has been fractured. Fully enthralled with his response to such vile regions of the human psyche, I implored, "What more have you come up with?" Pivoting back to the axes I brought to light, he continued, we can analyze the placement of every man on each axis through understanding that there are a series of interactions with the world. Each interaction with the greater reality to which we are exposed either incentivizes or deters us from continued pathways. Referentially unbalanced cause and effect exponentialities cause pooling at the corners. This gathering of men at the four corners is due to a repetitive positive or negative action loop. As facile as it is for the strong and good man to enact positivity and reap the rewards to further motivate the next action, both cases of the weak and evil men and strong but evil men can use this same pattern to embolden their depraved, sadistic, and hateful sentiment, embodied by their evil action, to drive them forward, each action bringing them further from the good. One toe dipped in and reasonably unharmed calls for a waist-deep inspection, followed by a dive. All this processing occurs at a level beneath malleable morality. It is from within their primordial drive for exertion of their presence. They would rather be evil and here than not here at all. To be known for their evil is even better for them, more exertion of their fight against goodness. Wanting resolution to the lack of real-world utility that was seemingly apparent in his explanation, I probed, asking, "So, how does all this help to solve any issues?" "Sexual misconduct," he quickly responded, "unto a child is the highest form of power these men can muster. Pure innocent weakness is overridden by evil strength, hence the satiation of their will to power." Removing our empathetic minds for a moment and shifting our focus to the logical progression of things, we can convert the perversion into a productive discussion. By understanding that people are guided by society through incentivized action and control loops, we can use this to realize that the evil that lurks in the shadows is a symptomology of a sick system. With the increasing movement away from the bolstering of the strength of men, caused by the conflation of the strong and good men with the strong but evil men, we have waged war against the founding principles that have governed men's understanding of strength from their inception. The erosion of the key tenets of masculinity has been enacted with much haste and in the guise of liberation from a falsely labeled system. The historically impaired Western system has been deemed a tyrannical patriarchy, as opposed to its true name, an imperfect meritocracy. As a result, the difference between good and evil has become blurred because the will to power has no socially acceptable pursuit. So, it is left to fester in the underbelly of the system. Thus, in order to overcome the societal annihilation of their power, men are forced to become unaffected by the constructs built around them, leading to the revitalization of their power, but only fashioned for evil action. With this theorization, we have a working pathway to ease the pain of these so-called evil men. We need to recreate a system where the incentive is placed on the strength of men to manifest in the realm of good. With this lofty pursuit to correct for mislabeling in mind, one must take individual action first. I'm sure you tell all your male clients this, and I guess I'm no different. Tommy pouted for a second. A man's pursuits, if they do not impeach other people's rights, are what truly make him a man at all. Agreeing with his pragmatic approach, I thought for a moment and then added, "This is a wonderfully considerate lens through which to view the evil of man." He quickly corrected my misconception, shouting, "I feel nothing but hatred for those evil men. There is no virtue or value to derive from their being. Only their anti-being will do. I have no compassion, only blind fury. I simply understand that these men are synthesized by the world, so it doesn't help anyone to try and solve problems by treating the effects. My anger remains, but the understanding of it all, and my desperation for a solution, supersedes my need for vengeance. For, technically, with all the claims of self as all and all for selves, there is no real harm outside of differentials of emotions and imbalances of power here. The postmodern, perfect paradise. True, it is that technically this is not out of alignment with the chaos that we have cultivated by way our lost way. The order of being has to have a truth to it, so that the victims and victimizers actually have a system of crystallizable understanding that there is more than their trauma-induced, proven, hollow self. Fill thought onlyable with animalistic escape into temperament-guided misdoings. Fuck yous to the strange feelings of moreness they resent absolutely, but cannot understand as absolute. We cannot fight a lack of proof of this moreness, translated by us by insisting on the idea that the previous, much faltered, antiquated translation is useful to selves once again. No, it is not sellable outside of a translation of actual truth total that the self should be in service of the more. The translation of the more could never be repackaged and repurposed into some sloppy and patchy proof of the more being in service of the self. That would be an inversion. It has to be a new and improved existential ordering in order to prove firstly at all that it was ever an actual translation of truth and not just synchronized dogma, and secondarily to show that the potency of any translational text is only to increase with a deeper understanding of the truth. You see, this is where Jung fails. Jung and his practical point of focus as self. Symbols don't move internally from external, but rather translations of truth change. This is entirely different. These symbols are not just abstract tools made of tight air to delude ourselves into believing. Rather, they are reductions of grand, perfect oneness within which the selves in between levels of consciousness may act and hope and be. There cannot be truth to true more than self-service as our highest virtue reflecting the actual fabric of conscious dynamics if the self is the focal total point. Jung, tools over truth. But I once heard Jung say that he knows God exists, and so perhaps my comprehension is lacking. Blood, sun, ballooning, blood, sun, thudding. Understanding Tommy's limits, I shifted from the topic after granting him reinforcement for his positive enactment of his own will to power, forcefully responding, "Well, I think your pragmatic perception is great." He quipped back, responding, "Yeah, I bet. Let's talk about this country. Oh, this land of freedom, with all its crony capitalism. It is no longer tainted towards, but rather is becoming, a corrupt tyranny. We sit on and take one injustice after another in the hopes that we will eventually find the bottom of this system's debauchery. This shift towards the dissipation of our sovereignty has all been so disgustingly disguised as goodness, our leaders greasily glowing from their own greed." He rolled his eyes, almost hurt personally by the unoriginality of his own idea. We no longer live for enriching experiences or movement forward. With our feet firmly fastened in the most fastidious quicksand, we are dragged into our designated futility. Like roaches, we feed, fuck, and fall to death, never truly living. I am tired of all this. I live for the persona I have created. This enigmatic master of minds, manipulative and distinguished. Layered in lingering lust, Lucifer, lovely and languid as he is, grasps lividly at the reins of the Leviathan he has created within me. I feel like a bottled cannon. With fragile glass broken, bottomless rage will be unleashed. I am not alone. I sit with all my others. Parched, we feast, longing for uneasy action. The good in us has been adjudged and condemned. There is no pride in a man's prosperity anymore. This is the system that will envelop itself. No pride? Fine. Welcome evil. I looked upon his enraged demeanor curiously. He was feeling what he had said so begrudgingly, like some possessed impostor, angry at his own revelation. His eyes were coated in the most unwanted fury, his blazing shame and guilt simmering just beneath. It was far more than internal despondency. He felt the world. He structured his understanding and mainlined the sympathy. That truth had proved much too monumental for him to bear. His heart had been corrupted by the most unsavory soot, lost to the evil machinations of the world. Trapped by his own hope for better, disillusionment on tap, Tommy skulked behind the shadows of the window's edge, shifting slowly backwards in his chair. With his sadness turning surly, he softly continued, saying, "I ran across a beautiful snake the other day. Though perhaps a monster to its prey, it was so vulnerable and weak to me, in my shadow. I looked closely at the slithering serpent as it twisted and turned along the hot pavement towards its next meal. It wriggled away slowly, at its top speed, and I watched that faultless part of nature slide towards his fate, or perhaps from it. I felt pity at first, and then the most enormous wave of regret for my initial interpretation slammed into me. The creature that lay in front of me was not pitiful. In fact, it was much more at peace with this world than I could ever wish to be. I was envious. My jaded jealousy took a hold of me. Finally filled with this odd, furious fascination, I picked up the small creature. Its malleable and dexterous skin proved unmanageable, falling out from my grasp quickly each time I attempted picking it up. Somehow it sensed what was to come. Tommy looked up and smirked grimacingly, with a subtle yet direct threat in his eye. I felt my bones quiver with the girth of such a smile. Through gritted teeth, Tommy continued his story, saying, "I whispered to him from above, 'We are all tired of this.'" Tommy loosened his jaw, almost losing his breath to his morose entrancement. "And then I took my heel and drove it down with such unhinged lunacy, stomping until only a paste remained. A paste he was, a paste he became, especially his head, some pulpy pate, so rich with innocence. So perhaps I have spat upon God's creation, or maybe the rules of engagement into which I have been birthed have deemed it so. Either way, we suffer." Clenching onto my seat, with my elevated heart rate looking upwards at my fear, I reacted violently, needing to at least shout at Tommy and chastise him. "I have half a mind to demand you leave my office immediately," I said firmly. "This is no place for the excusal of psychopathy. You, my boy, need to reevaluate your choices. Each erosion of your soul is at the detriment of you. The world suffers secondarily. Always remember that." Bursting into laughter, Tommy corrected himself, retorting, "It was from a web page I had read from on the dark web. I continued my research after the documentary into the sick and twisted creatures of the night, you see. I took it upon myself to observe, with great recitation, the logos enlisted by such heinous characters." "Wow, you thought I would so quickly disclose my indulgence in the darkness if I was a psychopath? Come on, give me some credit here." I stared disparagingly at him. Our first terrifying confrontational disagreement was a facade. I felt a perfectly unbalanced mixture of sickness, anger, and envy building within me. His masterful manipulation was all too perfect. I asked him to leave shortly after, and he agreed with little resistance. It took some time to clear the dark energy that he had brought upon and perfused throughout my space. My heart remained racing for some time, still unsure whether in his anecdote or excuse the truth resided. He returned to me shortly after. 20 minutes or so passed before he poked his head into my office. With a false ease gracing his face, he attempted to mask his gleeful submergence into the most insufferable and sadistic satisfaction with my terror. He quickly recognized my disapproval of his, at best, trivialization of the moment. "Look," he said gently, "I am sorry for bringing up such an awful actuality with little preparation. but please don't conflate my callous coping mechanism with some non-desire for better. The proof that would lead to this world's vindication rests at my feet. It pulls at me, begging for some enrichment of my heart and soul through action. I sit back, though, stuck in all the bad, totally soured to the benevolence all around me. I had no idea that it was so contagious. I meant only to share how it had made me feel. I figured that was what this is all about. Now looking at me seriously, Tommy awaited my rejection or acceptance of his shining apology, so well crafted. I stared at him once more in silence and accepted his apology, easing the mood with a witty retort. "You are absolved," I loudly announced, with some strange confidence behind my voice. He smiled. I was instantly filled with shame at my fearful reaction to a client. I had breached my professionalism and impartiality once again. I couldn't look at him. I looked down from the young man in the doorway and said, "I am here to listen and be as least judgmental as possible. I will do better. Let's stick to normal sessions. Maybe an ounce of banality would be nice." When I looked up from my statements, I realized that he had left. Just my emptied office remained, still stained by his darkness. I sat frigidly for a while, pondering how much of my disclosure he had heard. After begging for clarity of mind, I came to rationalize what had played out before me. It was a clear case of hyperviolent desensitization. He had something brewing deep within his forebrain, festering. I took a note to guide me back to an understanding of Tommy. Less encumbered by my judgment, my hope in Tommy's sanity filled me once more as I wrote the following. In a strange way, a victim of a violent crime must seek a new mental framework once the original lens has been shattered. Though still silent on the matter, Tommy has experienced life-altering trauma that has brought him to his knees. I know this to be true. Like with any trauma, we can measure its damage by comparing the moment with the baseline perception. Thus, the deformity of Tommy, shining brightly as recreations of his trauma by proxy equivalent similar type reenactments, is more a reflection of the distance from his baseline than the manifestation of evil he encountered. Hence, we can assume that Tommy was enormously innocent when the trauma occurred. Alternately, the trauma could have been extraordinarily awful for a man of any age to encounter. In a case as extreme as Tommy's, both of those assertions may be true. As I meditated on the potentialities of his wounding, I couldn't help but to feel sorry for him and extend out the most paternally desperate empathy. I thought about his misguided undertakings, not only of his movement into the darkest places to seek, but also the framework within which he had been living, constructed so unconsciously. Unable to concentrate through the problem-solving, too laden with sores, he had been building the most putrid perception. I was called so clearly by something to aid in the boy's recovery. This concludes Chapter 5, Part 2 of In the Darkness I See, by Anon Y.